Everyone. Good morning to our West Coast friends. Good afternoon to those of us on the East Coast and somewhere in the middle. I am Whitney Dailey. I'm an Executive Vice President at Allison Partners. We are a global communications firm, and I co-lead our Purpose Center of Excellence. So this is our dedicated team specializing in purpose, brand strategy, ESG leadership, backed by Allison Partners' global network of more than 500 creatives and storytellers. Just a reminder to mute if you are not muted and not one of our panelists. I have also been on the board of Impact Relations Institute for the past year and a half. I co-chair our academic committee, and I'm also stepping in as an interim chair for our marketing communications committee. If you're not familiar with IRI, the Impact Relations Institute works to legitimize and educate professional communicators on the discipline of authentic and transparent communications and how this transcends to positive impact. We have a global network of over 1,200 communicators from around the world, and we stand in solidarity to demonstrate and promote the importance of responsible, purpose-led communications and principles, and that helps us really collectively drive change. We invite new members, so if you're a new face here, welcome. You can join us by pledging on our website, impactrelations.org/pledge. So we are here today to participate in Impact Council. A little bit of housekeeping, some guidelines for today's conversation. As Melissa mentioned, we will be recording this session and sharing it on our website and externally. So just be mindful of sharing any sensitive information that you would not want in a recording. If you have questions, we are going to leave time at the end for audience Q&A. Pop those in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor for those throughout today's session and then definitely get to them at the end. And when we get to that more dialogue session at the end, please practice yes and communications and aim to listen and learn. These councils are meant to be about this community and our collaboration and collectively learning from each other. So hopefully you'll find a lot of value from today's session. As I mentioned earlier, but also just a good reminder, please mute yourselves and refrain from interrupting the conversation. Respectively use the chat box. So with that, I am going to do a quick introduction of today's topic before I get to our incredible panelists. So today we're going to be talking about reproductive justice and how brands can use their marketing, their communications, and leverage that to advance this conversation. As we all know, Politico leaked a draft opinion that the Supreme Court had voted to potentially overturn abortion rights through Roe v. Wade. This is a 1972 ruling, which really guaranteed federal constitutional protections of abortion rights. This is paired with a subsequent 1992 decision from Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which kind of further secured these rights. And I think since early May, we have all been grappling with the potential ramifications of such a decision, which is expected, we're expected to hear more, obviously, at the end of this month, leading up to the Supreme Court break in July. This leaked opinion has really sent companies and individuals scrambling on how to respond, not only from an potentially employee updates for healthcare, but also how we can potentially take a stand on this issue from a communications perspective. And for the most part, corporate America has been quite quiet on this issue, with the exception of a few brands and some that have supported and communicated around reproductive justice on a state-by-state level. And this is even though myriad data exists to show that this issue isn't quite as divisive as the media would like to portray. And we can unpack that a little bit more. But a few proof points I wanted to call out from various studies that have been conducted, not only this year, but last year. First up, a CNN study conducted in January of 2022, nearly 70% of Americans do not want the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. A secondary poll conducted by Fox News in December of 2021, nearly 2/3 of Americans want Roe to remain the law of the land. And specifically a Marquette study, which was fielded in September of last year, voters opposed overturning Roe v. Wade by a 30-point margin. There's much more data to share around this topic, Let's go into kind of how we can all unpack this issue as communicators, as brand leaders, and see how we might be able to best engage around this topic. With that, really excited to welcome our speakers to the stage. We have Michael Kaye and we have Amanda Brinkman. I'll start quickly with Michael. Michael is an Associate Director of Global Communications for OkCupid, one of the world's largest dating apps. He leads PR programming in the United States and for countries across Europe and the Middle East. Michael has been featured in ABC News, Business Insider, Bustle, Elite Daily, Good Morning America, NPR, New York Times, Vice. I literally could go on all day. But outside of PR or outside of the office, he teaches PR principle and practices at NYU, and he is on the board of the Human Rights Campaign. Our second panelist of the day, Amanda Brinkman. She is an award-winning creative marketer and storyteller. She's based in New Orleans. Amanda actually created the internationally viral Nasty Woman movement. I know Amanda is going to speak more on this in particular, but this movement, and specifically the Nasty Woman shirt, raised nearly $200,000 for nonprofit organizations, including Planned Parenthood. Her work has been featured in a laundry list of well-known publications as well, from Washington Post to Teen Vogue, Variety, and more. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists, starting with the beginning of the alphabet. So I'll be going to you first, Amanda. Would love you to share a little bit more about yourself, your organization, and how your role touches the issue in the conversations around reproductive justice.
Great. Thank you so much, Whitney, and thank you all for being here and for having me. And yeah, I'll jump right into it. So hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Brinkman, and I like to call myself a creative marketer. So my work focuses on the power of pop culture and storytelling to change the way that brands and businesses and content creators reach their growing audiences. So I've worked both in-house and on the agency side of telling compelling brand stories. And my work really focuses on not just a single brand message, but really how to turn that message into a movement. So my best known work is with the company I founded, Shrill Society, and my Nasty Woman campaign. So Whitney touched on that, but just for a little bit of fun, that was never meant to be more than just 5 shirts. So in October of 2016, like all of you, I was watching the presidential campaign. And when Trump called Clinton a nasty woman, I had my computer out. I decided I was going to turn it into a shirt. I quickly mocked it up. I should note I had never made a shirt before. And I didn't even have a retail or e-commerce brand or company. I just thought, I just felt very compelled in the moment. And I posted on Instagram. I have not a ton of followers. It's a private account, so just my friends, and said I was going to donate 50% of the proceeds to Planned Parenthood. I thought maybe if I was lucky, by the end of the night, I would donate $100, and maybe a few of my closest friends would have bought a shirt. So to my surprise, the next morning, I'm trying to get into my email. I can't get it. It's loading so quickly, and all I see is tens of thousands of emails, and it's loading so quickly I can't actually focus. The page is refreshing itself constantly. So by 9 a.m. there's 10,000 orders, and from there it just was a wildfire and really caught on. And I had sort of 3 viral moments, so it wasn't just a singular viral moment. It kind of continued for the next year, and during that time I collaborated with a lot of brands: Red Bull, LFS, Turner Broadcasting, the Ad Council, Maker's Mark, all sorts of different brands, to actually tell the story of nasty women, but also reproductive justice, and to continue raising money for Planned Parenthood. So as Whitney noted, the shirt has raised nearly $200,000, and most of that going to reproductive justice organizations. And all of that has been very transparent. So it was important to me in this process as well to make sure that 50% of the proceeds were actually donated. And like I said at the time, this was not my job. So despite a lot of encouragement to, hey, you can add yourself as an employee, you can do this, you can do that, ways to kind of retain more money for myself and give less, I very much said no. This was just a project. This was a fundraising initiative. Let's keep doing it. So that's why the donation amount from just a single individual was able to be so high. And from there, it really turned into an e-commerce platform with other women identified business owners and creatives who were also supporting reproductive justice, having a marketplace to sell their own work. And that allowed me to continue doing creative projects with Nasty Women and Shrill Society with different brands, publishing a tabletop game with Penguin Random House, and doing a lot of public speaking and creative media projects with partners. So yeah, that's hopefully the long and short of it. And I'm excited to pass it over to Michael.
Awesome, thank you. I don't think it's fair to have to follow Amanda because she's so impressive, but nice to meet all of you. I lead global communications for OkCupid. I joined the company in 2019, and in my role, I focus on earned media and purpose-driven initiatives, as well as brand partnerships with both corporations and nonprofit organizations. As a dating app, we are a platform that fosters connection and conversation. We do this through providing our users with in-app matching questions, which have been answered more than 225 million times in 2022 so far, and cover dating, relationships, and sex, but also issues that are top of mind for Gen Z and millennial users, like, does the US need stricter gun control? Do you support marriage equality? And should the government defund Planned Parenthood? And these questions show us what's important to all our users. And over the years, threats to reproductive rights have been really one of the top concerns for our daters across the United States. And that's why we've been working with Planned Parenthood for years and have really remained vocal on this issue for quite some time, which we are going to discuss a little bit later. And I'll just add that I think it's great that we're all here today having this conversation. Personally, it's extremely disheartening that we even have to have this type of discussion. My biological mother had an abortion at 16 years old, knowing she was not able to handle taking care of a child. And at 19, she wound up giving birth to me. And before my first birthday, I was already being raised by someone else. And so many of us have stories that involve reproductive rights. So women have the right or deserve the right to choose what's best for them, regardless of the circumstances. And I'll toss it back to Whitney.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for that. I think that, in our society today, whether it's known or not something that's shared, this is an issue that touches 100% of individuals. And so I appreciate you kind of sharing your story and why we're here today, why we need to have these conversations, and also, tying back to our roles as communicators. How can we use our brands, our marketing dollars, our followers, our fans to raise awareness for important issues, change behavior, change minds, potentially change policy on this issue and many others facing society today? And I guess I'll start by asking you, this is something we were kind of chatting about on the prep call earlier today, is, when is the right time for a brand to speak out? And obviously we're kind of in this like in-between space right now where we've all seen the leak. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to make its formal announcement towards the end of the month. Some brands spoke up right away. Some brands might be planning internally right now to prepare a statement that might go out closer to when we hear from the Supreme Court. But when's the right time to engage? And how can brands kind of use their platform to potentially make an impact on these issues? Michael, I'll turn it over to you to start.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think brands need to start speaking out before we are in code red. Oftentimes it's a bit too late, and it's important that we do not wait till something is trending on Twitter or that there's breaking news, to start talking about what's important to our employees, what's important to our consumers. We really need to get ahead of the conversation. I am on the board of the Human Rights Campaign, and we were talking about this topic a couple of months ago. And something we heard from our partners at the national headquarters is that a lot of the politicians that we were talking to were not hearing about how important marriage equality is when they were talking to the CEOs and other senior leaders. And it's because we're waiting too long to talk about how important an issue is. And if we're not talking about it in enough time, we're reaching a point where it's almost too late for many of us to start activating and advocating for an issue. So if this is something you are discussing with your friends or discussing at home with your family or even your coworkers, you should be talking about it externally.
And Michael, do you consider Code Red? Are we in Code Red, or is Code Red happening towards the end of June?
I think we reached Code Red a while ago. And I think if you're someone, and this is not judging anyone, but if you're someone who thinks Roe versus Wade isn't going to impact me, I'm a gay man. I'm never going to have an abortion. But you have to think about how these issues are going to impact a wide range of different legislation. If we are allowing government to police our bodies, women's bodies, start thinking about the other things that are going to lead to this. Marriage equality is at threat now. So if you feel like this doesn't impact you directly, I would encourage you to see that it very much does.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Michael. Amanda, anything you want to add to, when is the right time to engage on these issues?
Yeah, so agreeing with Michael, I think it needs to happen before it reaches this Code Red. But also, I think this is when larger companies and corporations can really lose touch with what's actually happening in their consumer base and their customers and their constituents, because they're not employing social listening. So I would really advocate for using social listening, find out what's happening, what are people talking about, what's worrying your customers, and speak directly to that, even if it doesn't really relate to your product. I think being able to have those conversations, have them in a nimble way without it always having to be this, big release or announcement. Those should come, of course, when it comes time to make these very strong statements, but these conversations should be ongoing with the community that's already built and they're already talking, and ensuring that your brand is a part of those conversations by employing just social listening tools and skills, and using your community manager and that team to really be spearheading that.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, kind of understanding how your brand fits within the cultural zeitgeist and understanding the pockets of conversations that were happening. And as we go back to that concept of Code Red, what do you say to companies or brands that are like, oh wow, we recognize that we need to do something, but we've never engaged on this topic before. We have no programs that we can pinpoint. We have no announcements that we've done previously, but we want to speak out. But we're also worried about, being targeted for inauthenticity or targeted for not having done enough already. Any words of wisdom that you can share that could, help those companies that are realizing that it's time to start engaging? Michael, I might start with you, or Amanda, were you going to jump in? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. One of us can jump in, but I think just being really transparent in those moments, and like I said, being nimble, being quick, talking to the audience, and just saying, this is really important. As a team, we're going back to figure out how to further implement these ideas, not only in our, how we're communicating outwardly, but what we're doing to function as a company, how this affects our staff, our mission, vision, values of our company. And so I think just being transparent of, we don't have all the answers yet, but this is top of mind for us, and we're going to roll this out over time, and actually updating with what those changes are. I think being quick and honest is better than being meticulous and really late to those conversations. To that point, it's going to seem it could potentially seem like it is, it could be the most well thought out methodical rollout, and it may just seem like it is just damage control at that point. So I think given the landscape and the changing nature of a lot of these conversations and the timeline, it's just so important, I think, to be quick to have a stance, and then you can provide the receipts as you're doing the work.
Michael, any words of wisdom from your experience on that front?
Yeah, I would just quickly add that, building off what Amanda said, you don't have to have all the answers. We are corporations. You're not expected to be a Planned Parenthood or an NAACP or a human rights campaign, but it's important to educate yourselves and partner with these organizations. They are so open to having conversations and working with you on internal or external efforts. That's what they are here for. So lean on them for support, and then in turn, use your platform and your voice and your social media channels to advocate for them as well.
And drilling down on partnerships and really leaning on nonprofits who are experts and have been in this space for a long time. Amanda, do you want to talk about specifically how your partnership with Planned Parenthood has evolved over the years, or what's coming next there?
Sure. So what's interesting is I don't have a formal partnership with Planned Parenthood. And the reason for this is I really want to support nonprofits in the work that they do. And I know that these larger nonprofits like Planned Parenthood have entire entertainment and partnership divisions. But for me, it's really important to support them and the work that they do with no strings attached. So when I wire that money over, I don't ask for it to be used in any way, or that it go to any specific programs. I really want to trust the people at the nonprofits to use the money how they see fit, and to actually support whatever is the most urgent in their organization. So for that reason, I actually don't do formal partnerships, and try to keep it as nimble and generous as possible. And for me, I think that creates a working environment in which I'm just supporting them, and it doesn't become this mutually supportive ecosystem, which I think can work for a lot of corporations and a lot of businesses. But like I said, for me, I really wanted to just be a support arm for them, with it just being a one-way street.
That's super interesting. And I think I like that kind of creates flexibility for you in engaging, or, if there's an issue that needs immediate attention, you can pivot in that moment and kind of, be a little bit more agile in terms of, where you're giving your dollars as an organization. And Michael, turning over to OkCupid, obviously, your platform has individuals that have values from across the spectrum, and some that may align with some of the issues that your brand is standing for externally, some individuals that don't. So how do you navigate that? And how do you have issues like, we're going to go full throttle on this issue, knowing that we might potentially lose members or offend members that are using our platform?
Well, we're not, this is a spoiler alert, we're never going to please everybody. So if you think that's going to happen, I hate to disappoint. For us, we're really the only values-driven dating app. So we lean into the issues that our Gen Z and millennial daters care about. What I personally love about OkCupid is that our in-app questions are conversation starters. They serve as deal breakers and deal makers for our daters. And there is not a single question or feature that we require you to answer or opt into. So if you are someone who isn't interested in talking about politics on a dating app or in your relationship, that's okay. And you're able to find someone who agrees with you in that way. If you aren't someone who's going to immediately go out and march in the streets, there's still someone else for you on our platform. So the experience really is what you make of it. And we do not force our users to become activists or advocates for any of these causes. However, the data shows us that our Gen Z and millennials are really the most progressive generations in history, which is why we tend to lean into that. So again, some of our features have tapped into climate change and reproductive rights and marriage equality. But all of those are features that if it's something you're passionate about, throw it on your profile. And if it's not, that's okay too. It's really totally up to the user.
And as a self-professed data nerd, I love that. Follow the data. Use your data to inform some of this. And thank you, Brad, for your question in the chat. Others, please chime in with your questions, and we'll definitely do our best to get to those. Building on this question, Michael, I want to dig in a little bit deeper on getting buy-in, not only with your members, but also with your senior leadership and C-suite. How do you kind of bring these issues, leveraging your data and your community mining? How do you say to your senior leaders, like, we're going all in on reproductive justice? How does that work for you?
Yeah, well, first, and this is another thing I love about OkCupid, I love a lot. What you see in our marketing campaigns and our product features not only mirror what our daters care about, but it's also really reflective of what our employees are passionate and vocal about. In fact, several of our inclusive product updates came from ideas that were brought to us from our daters or our employees. So we're listening to these key stakeholders. And I think what's important is at an organization like ours, we're not two parties or three parties. We're not our users and our employees and our senior leadership. We really all are partners together. So everything that we're doing is something that's really important to our entire C-suite. It is not just the marketing team driving these initiatives. Many times it's our CEO coming to us and saying, there's a problem right now. What can we do about it as a platform, as a marketing team? So for us, it's really easy to get that type of buy-in because these are causes that we're all really passionate about. I mean, we've been working with Planned Parenthood for 5 years now. So this isn't anything new for us.
And have you ever had employee groups come to you and say, like, this is not working for us, or it just seems like there's like a collective energy that's happening at OkCupid where you can feel good moving forward on these issues?
No, I think there's a collective energy and for our causes across the board. I would say we are hyper focused on climate change, reproductive rights, and LGBTQ issues. So for example, we're in Pride Month. We actually heard from different LGBTQ plus daters that there was an opportunity to educate and inform people about the different identities we offer. So earlier this month, we announced that we are adding different definitions to our gender and orientation options so people understand what all these terms mean. So many times it's these conversations behind scenes that are informing everything that we're doing. And we involve our employees in these different causes. So when we released the Black Lives Matter badge, our employees outside of the marketing team were the people who decided what Black civil rights organizations we were donating to.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really good point, is that, because OkCupid is out there about the issues in your marketing, in your communications, in your kind of brand experience, about what issues you as a company align with, that is flowing into the employee experience, but also the prospective employee experience. So they, prospective employees come to the table, come to the interview, kind of knowing what organization they're buying into. And that probably helps with that kind of collective buy-in once they're in the gate too. Amanda, I want to turn it back over to you and talk about, you mentioned Penguin Random House in your intro. I'd love to talk to you more about corporate partnerships and like how you kind of massage some of the fear that you might be getting from bigger corporates to partner on issues.
Yeah, so oftentimes it's from like very passionate employees at these organizations. They'll reach out or I'll reach out to them and we develop a plan of really like how we're going to work together and how we're going to fold in this messaging, and then get it far enough along in the pipeline to where at that point it's going to go live and it's going to happen. And so for, in that way, they also wanted to, as a brand, look, maybe LFS, for example, they are a fintech company that focuses on women identifying investors. And they knew that there was an overlap in their audience, and they really wanted to use some of the credibility of Nasty Woman that would appeal to their larger audience. And so we were able to really develop campaigns that considered the overlapping audience, but also giving LFS the ability in that moment to share their stance and some of their alignments in that way. So it was almost like a softer way, I would say, for them to actually make these announcements. And they did it in such a way where it wasn't like here's a statement and here is, our mission, vision, and values aligned with the statement. But it was more of a, hey, we've always been this way. These are the type of people that we partner with. This is a part of how we operate. So for them, I thought it was like a very smart way of joining a ongoing zeitgeisty conversation without trying to do it from a top-down way. And I thought in that way, it really seemed organic and natural, and was able to be just folded into the brand in a way that felt really, it just didn't feel clunky. And oftentimes these things can feel really clunky when people do it in a way in which it's just a marketing first campaign. They're not really thinking about really how the company itself is aligning. So, oftentimes when I order something that is from a cause-driven or social impact brand and I get it in a Uline box, I think this is a marketing first social impact company. They're not actually thinking about how they're organizing their vendors, partnerships in a way that furthers this goal or agenda. So I think that it could be really nuanced, but with these corporate partnerships, I think it was just folding into their existing comm strategy, but then also holding them accountable. So when I would do a shirt for another brand, we made sure that it was environmentally responsible, was sweatshop free. And oftentimes these were questions that they weren't even asking themselves, they weren't even thinking about. And so me being the partner and being the creative had to really draw a line in the sand and say, hey, if we're going to work together, like it actually has to meet all of these expectations, because me as a creator and a brand cares deeply about these issues. And I can't, there's no wiggle room for me when it comes to that. So I would say every corporate entity that I partnered with was really cool with that in the end. It just took some conversations. But in these situations, there really is a right answer. Like, hey, we can have our profit margin can be slightly less and we can have a sweatshop free product that supports reproductive justice. Or, we can do something that is inelegant and not on brand and is going to be called out and is actually going to hurt what we're trying to do rather than support it. So a lot of these corporate partnerships just took a little bit of finessing and just ensuring that they were typically moving at such a pace to have them slow down and actually consider A to Z the decisions being made and ensuring that it was done responsibly.
That's thank you. That's like such an excellent point. And the thing that really stood out to me that you said towards the beginning was, hey, we've always been this way. So brands that have a strong brand purpose, companies that have a strong brand purpose, they can have these partnerships. They can speak out on issues because it's part of their brand DNA and it shouldn't shock anyone. I mean, Ben & Jerry's is a great example of that. They've been a longtime supporter of the Impact Relations Institute. I've worked with them for many years. And like when they made the statement, dismantle white supremacy, they got a lot of backlash on social, but at the same time, they armed their community managers to say, are you surprised that we're taking this stance? Like, this is something that's been part of our brand DNA. We have a 3-point mission, and one of them is around social issues. So, if brands can kind of create, if companies can create a bedrock as an organization that's focused on purpose, focused on values, then, at moments in time, it's more easy to kind of engage or form these partnerships or speak out, act quickly. And Amanda, one more question for you, and I want to acknowledge that the reproductive justice conversation is not the only very emotional, urgent issue in society that individuals, families, companies are facing. Obviously, gun violence is top of mind for many people. And we've seen a few CEOs speak out on that, specifically kind of Chip Berg at Levi's, who's been engaged in the gun violence conversation. But you've worked with personality-driven brands. How do you kind of help to push individuals to be more vocal? And also, how can we get executives to be more opinionated?
Yeah, so I think that's actually, there's two different ways to do this. To get executives more opinionated, I think Michael could actually speak to this more, but I think if the bottom line is revenue, then bringing the data to say, hey, this is our audience, this is how they feel, and this is actually how we can drive that revenue. And he could speak to that, I'm sure, much more in depth than I can. But when it comes to personality-driven brands and having, I like to think of like Microsoft as an example. You have Bill Gates, who's very progressive and will make these stances, and then Microsoft doesn't say anything. And I actually think that's a disservice because what it does is it creates a scenario in which a single individual can have a personality, they can have opinions, and then their, brand, corporation can remain neutral. But our consumers aren't looking for neutrality. Our consumers are looking for those heads of companies to actually not only be opinionated, but to drive their business in a way that represents those stances. And so I think when it comes to personality-driven brands, I really push these individuals who I've worked for or who I partner with to take a public stance, both in their personality-driven platforms, but also in their businesses, and to make sure that like those are reflected and there's a mirror there. And yeah, I just think it's really important in this time that we don't just rely on the heads of corporations to have a stance, and then their business is able to work in a way that's counter to that, and then they can say it's the stakeholders or it's the audience or it's any of these things, then blame can just like be assigned anywhere and they're kind of held unaccountable. So I think it's really important for any brand that's personality driven that front facing person is held accountable, and that their opinions on these different intersecting issues are they're just held accountable to making sure that their brand is actually working towards being solution based.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, just a reminder that you can have a very, vocal executive, but today the bar is higher for all types of brand engagement. Michael, anything you want to add to that? How can we get executives to be more vocal? How can we push personalities, I suppose?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to go back to data for a second. And whether it's an executive speaking out or us as a brand addressing an issue or bringing an idea to the C-suite or our product team, we are always focusing our conversation on the impact the work will have on our users. Over the years, we've introduced several product features and chosen for those launches to support the ACLU, Black Girls Code, Earth Day Initiative, earthday.org, GLAAD, the Human Rights Campaign, NAACP, Planned Parenthood, When We All Vote. And it gets easier and easier to encourage our executives or our brand to speak out in support of an issue because we're constantly drilling back that idea around the impact it has on the very people that are on our platform. So for example, we focus on reproductive rights. We know that men on OkCupid who added the pro-choice badge to their profiles saw an 85% increase in likes, and women who added it saw a 60% increase in likes. That's a metric that our key stakeholders, especially our senior leadership and product teams, are really interested in. And then obviously these features drive press results, which increases our brand awareness. And that's another key metric for us. So we've been doing this work for years, so it's not something we're testing right now. We've kind of nailed it down, but we go back to the impact that making a statement or actually changing our product to support these causes, we focus on the impact it's had, and it's gotten easier.
And that's just such an important point. Like, as much as we can build in measurement into providing our support of issues, being part of this conversation. How is it impacting the consumer experience? How is it impacting stakeholder experiences? that just kind of helps to build the case to continue doing this type of work. It's not easy. I commend you, Michael, and OkCupid for kind of figuring out some of that, but it's definitely important so that we can kind of continue selling in this work. I'm going to go over to our audience Q&A, and again, folks, feel free to continue adding questions. I feel this topic is so important, and our panelists just have a wealth of knowledge. I wish we could talk for another 3 hours, but I'll start with Brad's question. Are there any brands that are standing out on women's issues right now that would be viewed as best practice? Any brands that you're seeing that are standing out to you, Amanda or Michael, that you're like, okay?
There's been a lot of brands who have inserted themselves into the conversation over the last month. And to be honest, I'm nervous about citing a brand incorrectly. But in what I've seen several, not enough, but several brands do that I've really liked is not just putting a statement out on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever their platform is of choice, but actually making health benefit changes to what they offer employees. Really changing their approach to what's happening. The statement is great, and it does it's great for awareness and visibility for this issue, but actually helping your employees or your key stakeholders, whatever it is, that's what I really like to see.
Yeah, and I'll just second that and say that, employees are becoming an increasingly important stakeholder. And they're looking at your brand just as much as a consumer is, and making sure that any program, any statement that you're making externally, you are backing it up with action internally and thinking of your employees as a critical stakeholder for programs and policies that ladder up to your external stances. It's just such an important step to take. So thank you for pointing that out, Michael. Anything that you're seeing, Amanda? Any brands, and if not a brand, what you consider best practice for engaging on women's rights issues?
Yeah, so I'm actually just kind of echoing Michael here, because some of the brands I had written down earlier that I think are doing a great job of actually protecting their employees by offering these more comprehensive health benefits that allow them to get healthcare over state lines. Also, there's corporations that are offering relocation packages for those in states like Texas, and I'm based in New Orleans, Louisiana, so that, would definitely impact people here. So yeah, like Michael, I probably don't want to name any names in case they greatly disappoint us. But Match Group that Michael's representing is one of those organizations. I'll go ahead and mention them. And then of course you have, different media brands, tech companies that are, I think it's important to say what they're not doing. So, this goes back to the personality driven, brand heads who are, the top of a brand like Facebook, where Sheryl Sandberg is very vocal about these things, but Facebook is not an organization to look to for inspiration when it comes to these things. So going back to that, I think that it's kind of a slippery slope, right? That what are companies doing that are actually impactful versus what is really just a marketing initiative. So for groups like Match Group, I think they're actually putting their money where their mouth is, and that's what I want to see.
And both of you talk about getting your house in order, or a brand getting their house in order, and thinking about the issue from kind of a 360 perspective. And I think it kind of goes back to that tension that a lot of companies are dealing with. Do we, and Michael, you touched on it earlier as well, do we go out with the statement on day one because we know as a brand we have a responsibility to use our brand, our platform, our marketing dollars to point more eyes to this issue and flag this issue? Or do we, go internally and try and create the programs and policies that will help our employees? And how do we juggle those two things to make sure that we're participating in an important conversation while also, providing the action, the receipts that are necessary to be authentic and supportive of communities? I don't know. A tough one.
I mean, for the conversation around reproductive rights, it's been easy for us to act quickly, again, just because we So for example, or just for background, we were launched in 2004 and we relied off of word of mouth without a marketing team until 2017. That's when our marketing team was formed. 2017 is the first year we started working with Planned Parenthood. So it was quite literally one of the first things we've been doing externally for 5 years now. For other issues, and I think Amanda actually mentioned this earlier, you don't have to have all the answers immediately. So when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, I remember talking to our executives on the weekend and I said, I don't know what to say right now, but we need to say something. And we got a 1-sentence statement out. And in that, we let people know more is coming. You know, we're not just saying this statement, we're going to follow up with everything we've done internally so that you know. And we followed up a few days later and announced our Black Lives Matter profile badge. Building off of that, we added in questions about racial equality so that people can start having these conversations that are awkward or difficult. And then we also shared where we were donating. So we didn't have all that information in the first statement we shared about the issue, but we let people know more is coming and we had work to do.
Yeah, transparency, sharing the journey, and not just the ultimate goal is extremely helpful. Going back to our Q&A, Melissa has a question for you, Amanda. Would you recommend we focus on employees over CEOs to drive change on an issue or effort?
Yeah, so I think that working with employees is a faster way to actually start moving things up the chain and to start actually building out programs and campaigns. But there does need to be some C-suite buy-in at some point in the process, only because there have been instances in which C-suite has said, hey, I actually don't want our business to have anything to do with anything political at all. And that can actually lead to programs being completely shut down and termination. So in order to avoid that, I think there needs to be a buy-in at some point, and you do that through data, right? So, hey, we tried this, we did this campaign, we did this donation drive, and here are our results. We were able to acquire X number of new followers or customers or whatever. And usually the person who's responsible for the bottom line, if you can show them how this is supporting that, they're in, right? So I would say getting in with employees, at least for me, is the strategy.
And Michael, I think you touched on a few examples that were from day one created by employees and kind of brought up through the organization and implemented. So that's great. And certainly employees are incredible drivers of getting buy-in at other levels of the organization. I'm mindful we only have 3 minutes left. We have another question from Tessa, which I think is an incredible point. And to frame it, the aperture of Roe v. Wade has certainly changed a lot since 1972, and we need to be inclusive and recognize intersectional conversations as a part of this conversation. But specifically, Tessa's question is, what is your recommended approach for ensuring stories from a diversity of women, individuals who identify as women, are represented in conversations on reproductive justice? How can we make sure that we are advocating equitably? Anyone want to kick it off? Michael, can I key it up over to you if you have any thoughts on this? I know it came up on our prep call a little as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we need to be inclusive with everything that we're doing, definitely in conversations around reproductive justice. But for us, we take the same approach to a campaign or a press story or the influencers that we work with. And anything you see coming out of OkCupid, there are people who identify on a wide range of spectrum. We have people who are non-binary and pansexual and transgender and from all different races and ethnicities. I'm not going to speak to what the brand was doing a decade or more ago, but I would say the past few years, this has been core to anything that we do, that we are representing the actual people that are on our platform. That's just kind of what I have to share about that.
Amanda, any builds?
Sure. So I do have a background as being a creative director. And so one thing I did as a creative director in storytelling is letting people tell their stories and not having a certain final output in mind. So going into the process being very open to stories and where those stories are going to lead, and knowing that by putting them in a position in which they could feel comfortable and share these stories, and we would be able to craft together what that final product was going to look like, actually enabled a really wide variety of stories to be told from a diverse set of folks. So that was really important to me, is not being so reliant on like what the outcome was going to look like and how it was going to be impactful, but knowing that through a lot of empathetic listening and really understanding what we were trying to do, that you could guide people to being comfortable and sharing really, their stories that are oftentimes quite vulnerable, in a way in which they actually feel supported and not exploited. And so I think being really open to the process during these moments really has allowed me to build storytelling campaigns that feel really uplifting. And I often try to do things through some sort of comedic lens, which can be really hard when things are not funny. But I think when you're able to get people to relax a little bit by joking around, they tell a story that is less buttoned up, right? And that also just like is a very readable or watchable sort of piece of creative. So that's how I do it. I know that's like a pretty amorphous sort of process, but I think it's just important to go with the process and not always be so dependent on like, the final destination, and be along for the ride, and understanding that what you build and what you make could actually look really different in conclusion than what you had set out to do. And I think as communication specialists and marketers, we should be really open to that fluidity.
Yes, thank you for that final thought. And I think we need to wrap up now. Again, I think we could be going for a long time on this conversation, but I want to take a moment again to thank everyone who took an hour out of their day today to participate in this conversation and learn and listen. It's so critical that we stay together as a community on this and do what we can all do and learn from each other and share this knowledge so that we can push forward these efforts within our own companies and be ready for what might come moving forward. So thank you again so much to Amanda, to Michael for your expert commentary and thoughts on this. You are both incredible. Keep doing what you're doing. And thank you to the Impact Relations Institute community for joining us today. And take care.
Thank you.